The year was 1942, and the skies over Europe were already thick with the acrid smoke of war. Lieutenant James Hawke, Halpern sat rigid in the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt, squinting against the glare as his squadron roared above the French countryside. Barely 22 and fresh from flight school, Halpern had grown up watching biplanes at barnstorming shows in Kansas. Now he was hunting Messerschmitts at 15,000 feet. The war had turned dreamers into warriors and boys into steel-hearted predators. His wingman, Sergeant Elias Echo Rivera, was quieter, but no less lethal. Where Halpern had fire, Rivera had ice, a man who didn't speak unless he had something to kill. Their squadron, the 97 Fighter Group, had been tasked with escorting B-17 bombers on a deep raid into the industrial heart of Nazi Germany. The target, a munitions plant near Essen. Intelligence had warned of heavy flak and a strong Luftwaffe response. The brass called it Operation Goliath, a name that didn't sit well with Halpern. Goliath had lost after all. He felt the tension even before takeoff, an undercurrent of fate thickening the air like fog before a storm. As they neared the rendezvous point, radio chatter crackled in their ears. Eagle 1 to group, bogey spotted, high at 2 o'clock. Halpern leaned into the throttle, the roar of the engine matching the rush of blood in his veins. A formation of FW-190s and BF-109s sliced across the horizon like shadows come to life. This wasn't a drill. This was survival. The bombers lumbered on below, fat targets that drew fire like beacons. Halpern and Rivera dove into the fray, weaving through tracer rounds, trading bursts of machine gun fire with German aces who danced through the sky like ghosts. Halpern's heart pounded as he lined up on a 109, firing in short, calculated bursts. The enemy plane buckled, smoke trailing from its engine as it spiraled down. One down, too many to go. But not all stories ended with heroism. In the chaos, one of the B-17s, call sign Ghost Bell, took a direct hit. Its engines coughed smoke and flame, and its formation broke apart. Halpern's eyes caught the moment when its tail section, severed by flak, began to fall. Inside was a tail gunner, Corporal Marty Hensley, a 19-year-old from Brooklyn with a fast mouth and quicker aim. No one could see what happened to Marty, whether he bailed, prayed, or just screamed into the cold wind. That was the nature of sky combat. 1 second you were alive. The next, you were a vapor trail. Back at base, silence weighed heavier than words. Rivera cleaned his pistol in silence while Halpern scribbled in his flight log, his hands still trembling. News came in dribbles. 12 bombers lost, 28 fighters missing. The mission had crippled the munitions plant, but at a steep cost. Ghost Bell was gone. Marty was gone. And they all felt it. Command was pleased, of course. Strategic success, the report read. A small sentence that made Halpern's stomach turn. Over the following days, the squadron continued its rotation. Missions blurred into each other, dogfights into memories, and faces into ghosts. But Marty's absence was different. Halpern had joked with him just hours before the mission, about baseball, about going home, about nothing in particular. And now, every time Halpern looked over his shoulder mid-flight, he half expected to see Ghost Bell pulling into formation. Yet war has no patience for grief. It was during a debriefing days later that a new order came in, an urgent strike over AV-2 rocket facility deep in occupied Belgium. Intelligence suggested another heavy Luftwaffe presence. Command was adamant. The skies had to be cleared, and the fighters would fly point again. The same fighters who had already lost too many. Halpern didn't speak during the briefing. He stared at the map, at the red circle that marked danger like a curse, and nodded when asked if he understood. The pilots filed out of the briefing room slowly, tension trailing behind them like exhaust smoke. Rivera glanced over. "You thinking about Marty?" he asked, voice low. Halpern's jaw tightened. "I'm thinking about how many more we're going to lose." That night, Halpern walked the airfield alone. The wind bit through his jacket as he looked up at the stars, so bright, so distant. Somewhere up there, he imagined Marty floating still, caught between fire and heaven. The next morning, engines roared to life again. New orders. Same sky. But this time, something was different. The Germans were adapting. And soon, Halpern and Rivera will be flying into not just a battle, but a trap designed to tear them from the sky. And this time, neither might make it out alive. The dawn light crept across the tarmac like a cautious specter, gilding the edges of the P-47 Thunderbolts in a soft gold that belied the violence to come. Halpern sat in the cockpit of his fighter, performing the pre-flight checks with mechanical precision. Every switch flicked, every dial checked, was a ritual, less for safety and more for sanity. Rivera was already airborne, circling above as the rest of the squadron scrambled into formation. The mission ahead was their most dangerous yet. A deep strike into enemy airspace to destroy a hidden V-2 launch site in the Ardennes. Reconnaissance had shown camouflage bunkers and anti-aircraft emplacements. The Luftwaffe would not let them through easily. As Halpern's plane lifted off the runway, the ground dropped away like memory. The engine thrummed through his bones, a dull roar that became a heartbeat. He climbed to join Rivera, who acknowledged him with a brief waggle of the wings. Over the radio, Captain Doerr's voice broke the tension. Eagle Group maintained radio silence from this point. Godspeed. Altitude thinned the air and sharpened the senses. Below, the green and brown of the countryside scrolled past like a painted canvas. Up here, there was no noise except the engine and no margin for mistakes. Halpern glanced toward Rivera, whose plane flew steady, unwavering, the ice to his fire. An hour in, just past the Meuse River, they spotted movement, dark specks high and fast. Bogies, BF-109s, diving from the sun. Halpern barely had time to throttle forward before tracers zipped past his canopy like streaks of lightning. The Luftwaffe had set the trap well. There were more than a dozen of them. He peeled into a high-speed roll, bullets stitching the sky where he'd been a second before. He heard Rivera's calm voice break the silence. "I've got 2 on me, splitting east." That was the last clear sentence Halpern heard for the next 5 minutes. Then the world exploded into chaos. The air filled with fury, chattering guns, screams over the radio, engines howling in stress. 2 Thunderbolts fell in flames. A German ace with a red-nosed 109 looped in behind Halpern, forcing him into a punishing dive that made the metal groan in protest. He pulled out at treetop level, skimming across a field, and jerked upward just in time to miss a church steeple. The 109 stayed with him, like a ghost. He yanked the stick left and rolled into a tight barrel turn, then hit the brakes mid-turn. A risky move, but one that caused the German pilot to overshoot. Halpern fired, and fire bloomed across the Messerschmitt's wing as it broke apart mid-air. 1 down. Again. But then came Rivera's voice, strained and breathless. Hit, losing oil pressure. "I'm dropping." Halpern's stomach dropped faster than the 109 had. "Say again, Echo." "I'm bailing. Tell my sister." The rest was lost in static. Halpern pulled up, scanning the sky. No chute, no wreckage, just empty cold sky. For a moment, Halpern hesitated. Should he circle back, risk getting picked off? Then duty seized his spine. He rejoined the battered remains of the squadron as they limped toward the objective. The V-2 site came into view through the haze. Long concrete hangars nestled among forested hills. Flak erupted around them, black blossoms of death. The bombers behind them bore the brunt, trailing smoke and flame. Halpern led the final push, guns blazing as they strafed the site. He saw fuel tanks erupt, trucks flip from blast, German soldiers scatter. The mission was a success, but at what cost? On the return flight, only 6 of the original 12 Thunderbolts remained. The silence over the radio was more deafening than gunfire. No one spoke of Rivera. Not yet. Back at base, Halpern walked straight from the flight line to the operations tent, his face streaked with smoke and blood. Not his. He gave his debrief with flat detachment, describing how the site had been destroyed, how German resistance had been fierce, and how they had lost half the squadron. When the officer asked about Rivera, Halpern just said, "He didn't make it." Later that night, sitting on an overturned ammo crate with cigarette burning low between his fingers, Halpern watched the horizon swallow the last of the day. Somewhere beyond the dark, another mission waited. Somewhere behind him, ghosts gathered. War in the sky wasn't just about dogfights. It was about what lingered when the skies fell silent. The mission report sat untouched on Halpern's cot, smudged with fingerprints and dust. He hadn't opened it. Didn't need to. He knew what it said. Target destroyed. Enemy resistance severe. Casualties, 6 aircraft, 8 Kia, 2 MIA. Rivera was one of them, missing, presumed dead. But Halpern couldn't shake the last transmission from his head. Tell my sister. Tell her what? That he vanished into smoke? That he fought until the last second, and then was simply gone? Sleep refused to come that night. In the pale glow of the barracks, Halpern took out Rivera's flight scarf, retrieved from his locker, and stared at the stitched initials, ER. He'd always said it was for both him and his sister Elena. 2 people wearing one name. He used to joke. It didn't feel funny now. The next morning brought no relief. Instead, it brought new orders. The squadron had to escort B, 17 bombers heading deep into Nazi-occupied territory. Intelligence indicated a German fighter wing was lying in wait. Halpern was assigned flight lead. The brass didn't care if you were grieving. They cared if you could still shoot straight and give orders. He could. He would. As the sun lifted the mist, the P-47s lined up on the runway again, engines rumbling like storm clouds gathering over Europe. Halpern climbed into his cockpit, clipped the scarf around his neck, and gave a silent nod to the sky. This one's for you. Rivera. The flight out was tense but quiet. The formation stretched like a metal spear across the heavens, the bombers trailing in close formation. Below them, the world looked peaceful, but Halpern knew better. The ambush came suddenly. 12 Focke-Wulf 190s diving from above, cannons blazing. Halpern didn't flinch. He peeled left, calling out coordinates and positions, his voice calm and clipped. His thunderbolt dove into the chaos. One bomber spiraled down in flames. Another held together with sheer will. Halpern locked onto her FW, 190 chasing a crippled B, 17 fired, and watched it break apart in a burst of fire and metal. But there were too many. He spotted a 190 bearing down on a straggling bomber, its gunners long dead. Halpern pushed his throttle, closing the gap. His guns lit up, tracing lines of death into the fuselage of the German plane. It veered, smoked, and then exploded. But the bomber it had targeted was already trailing flame. The crew bailed out, one by one, parachutes opening like ghostly blooms in the sky. Then a familiar voice crackled over the radio, weak, static-laced, but unmistakable. Eagle 3 to Eagle 1 took a detour. Halpern froze. It was Rivera. He scanned the sky frantically. 8P-47 swooped in from the east, paint scorched and tail chipped, but flying. Rivera was alive. I hit the trees and hid for 2 days. French resistance got me to a field airstrip, Rivera said, between bursts of static. Borrowed a ride back. Halpern laughed, an unhinged, giddy sound that almost brought tears. You insane bastard, he said, grinning in disbelief. Not insane, Rivera replied. Just punctual. The rest of the mission blurred. Together. The 2 men carved a path through the Luftwaffe, protecting the bombers until they dropped their payload and turned home. When the P-47s touched down hours later, battered but intact, the base erupted in cheers, not for mission, but for the man thought lost who returned on wings of defiance. That evening, Halpern and Rivera sat under the wing of their aircraft, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Rivera said, "You still have my scarf?" Halpern nodded. It flew with me the whole time. Rivera smiled. Then maybe it was lucky. Above them, the night sky was vast and silent. But in their silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not just survival, but brotherhood born of fire, forged in the crucible of aerial war. They would fly again. They would fight again. But for that one moment, they were whole and alive.